Alright, Dub Saw Shop here. Got this John Cutter 5800 we're doing some modifications to. So what I'm doing is modifying a 372 XP carburetor to fit on this. So what I started to do is, I want to say it's a MS 290, 390, 029, 039 intake boot. I cut the very end of the intake boot off, right where that flange is. That leaves us with this. The John Cutter intake boot, if you look right where I already cut the flange off, which is here, that isn't gonna be enough though, cutting it off. So right there where it's a line all the way around it where it starts to flare out, that's where you need to cut it. So the V is going to be on the bottom of the cylinder there. I'm trying to do this by hand. Again, don't have my tripod. But anyway, got some seal off. Once we get that cut, this piece is going to get glued on. It'll be turned. It's going to be glued on something like that. And the reason why we got to cut this shorter, the butterfly on the throttle is catching. So we got to get that smaller part of the intake boot back as far as we can away from this flange where it's gonna mate up. As soon as I get that done, I get back with you and we'll continue on this thing. I think it's gonna be a fun little project. So what I did, I just ran a layer of the seal oil on the inside of the boot that we cut off, a layer around the outside of the little stub that was left on the 5800. I let it set up, then I just went around the whole bottom side again with a layer, and I'm gonna wait on that to set up. You can see we got a pretty good little seal on the inside. After that sets, it's got like a 5-minute set time, but then like a, oh, what was it? 1 to 2 minutes before mating. Alright, dry time 2 to 3 minutes when it sets, and then 2 to 6 hours as a full cure. At temperature ranging from -40 to 150 degrees. So hopefully intake block shouldn't get that hot, no way. So after that's done, we're gonna go ahead and bolt it back on the saw. This original flange that was on the 5800, we're just gonna pop that back on and reuse it. And we're gonna try to bolt this thing up, take it from there. Hopefully we're gonna get this thing screaming demon, man. It's gonna be crazy. Right back when all that's ready and dry. All right, we're back in the shop cutting. Go ahead and pop this top and we'll show y'all what we had to do. So the first two parts of this, how we made the boot. Other than that, after you get your boot in, I actually use the high-low off of a Pharmatech. Anyway, the air filter works, top cover works. Once you make the flange like I showed you and bolt it up, you got that black divider piece. You just gotta squeeze the end of the intake boot, slide it through, and it ends up being the same, pretty much the length that you need to hook all this back up. Pieces that you're not going to use anymore are the carburetor adjustment grommet, the grommet for the throttle shaft. The way you have to bend the throttle rod kind of messes with that. This little flange off of the stock boot, you will not need that. This is just a little plug. I'll show you where that little thing goes here in a second. You will not need this. So that little plug actually sits right in there on that black divider plate. And the pulse line, instead of coming through the hole down there, you gotta notch the top cover so the pulse line can come out. The fuel line works, choke rod works. I'm gonna go ahead, pop the cover, and we will look underneath. All right, so we got the cover off. One other thing to note, on your throttle linkage, you know, you got the round little eyelet for that little plastic piece for your throttle cable on a 372 to go on. Pretty much just got to clip that whole little eye off so it will clear this wall. So this is the dam I was talking about. Once you screw your intake boot manifold back onto the cylinder, you got to slide this on, squeeze your intake boot, and just pop it through. That's going to be it. So this is what your carb bolts go into to hold it all. And this, the little round piece where the carb sets up against it, that's acting as your flange. The choke rod works in the same hole that your normal 372 does. What I had to do was just bend this rod out, just spread it out, make it a little bit wider so the angle would set back down. The only other big thing is the throttle rod. So if you have a carburetor that has the little hole in it right there where your rod goes through, it makes it a little easier, but if not, you'll just have to drill the hole there. And you pretty much just have to take the curve that's right here in the rod. You got to bend this straight. You got to bend this further up, and then bend this one out. So you got to lengthen that rod, make it a little longer. Other than that, everything pretty much bolts right up. I'll show you the choke here. Put the little grommet back in its home place. It'll probably pop out again, but choke just pulls and pushes. I knew I was going to do that. And idle, off idle. So the throttle, yeah, the linkage got to be bent. The fuel line works. You just got to kind of route it up above the throttle linkage where it hooks up. And where that little, this little rubber grommet used to set down in here, blocking that off. And then your pulse actually came through that hole right there. But coming through, the pulse hose is not long enough to get back here, what you gotta do. So just let it sit there where that little rubber grommet was. I just took a pair of snips and notched a hole in the top cover for it to go through. Everything works great. I mean, seems to be doing fine. It's got way more power in the cut. There ain't no doubt about that. And also what we did with this was changed it over to a 325 narrow kerf chain. This one's actually an Oregon. It's not the Country Line one. But the chain that comes with this bar was like, I think the bar and chain was $37 or so. And then they had the Oregon. It was on sale for like $20, so I went ahead and picked that up. Piece of dirt up in there. But yeah, that turns this thing into a little screamer. Okay, one more bit of advice before we end this video. The pulse nipple. On a 372, this pulse nipple is pointed straight back at the cylinder. In order for it to clear all of this, I just took it and rotated it slightly pointing towards the back. And in doing that, that allowed me to use the stock impulse hose. Hope you guys like it.